Jay Ashcroft joins us now live in studio on the record. Good to have you with us, Mr. Ashcroft.
Thanks for having me.
Do you want to be Missouri's next governor?
Right now, I want to make sure that November 8th goes smoothly, and whoever wins, whoever loses, they know that the election was run well, and they either won or lost fairly.
So I'm getting ahead of myself, maybe an election down the road. We have this election, your office administers that and gets the word out. That's one of the reasons you're here for this early voting push. On the voter ID, I want to circle back though and press you. Do you want to run for governor?
When you circle back, I'll answer it.
Well, I just did.
Look, I think I was taught that the best politics is good governance. And I think anyone that wants to move up to a higher office needs to prove that they can do the job where they are. And when you start looking at that next job instead of doing your job, you've generally proved you're not worth it.
But you won't deny that you have that ambition.
Right now, I'm focused on doing my job.
Okay, there's an answer.
And I love to serve the people of the state as long as they allow me to.
A bit of a public service announcement just to start off for people that are voting maybe for the first time with their voter ID. What do those folks need to know? Specifically those, maybe like myself, newer transplants, people who've moved to Missouri who might still have that old state ID. Can they still vote?
Of course. Welcome to Missouri. If you are registered to vote, you can vote. Go to your polling place on Election Day. You'll be able to vote. If you have that government-issued photo ID, your Missouri driver license, your Missouri non-driver's license, your federal government, your military ID, your passport, you can use those and vote just the normal ballot. If you don't have one of those, you can vote a provisional ballot. It's a normal ballot. They just require some extra information from you on the envelope you put that ballot into. You sign that, they put that in a secure location, and then they do a little bit extra to verify you are who you said you were after the polls close. Once they verify you, that ballot just goes right through the tabulator just like every other ballot.
On Amendment 3, to legalize recreational marijuana in Missouri, how will you vote?
I will vote no.
You're going to vote against it? Why?
I think we have a problem with the dichotomy between how the state deals with it and the federal government deals with it. And I think states need to continue to put pressure on the federal government. I don't think
in which direction?
I think I think it's ridiculous that it's not at least a Schedule 2, I guess, drug. I think
so you
it's
agree with the Biden policy to remove it from Schedule 1?
I don't know where it should be, but the idea that there is absolutely no therapeutic use for it, I think is silly. I think we ought to be able to do research on it. We do research on opium. That has a therapeutic use. I think we need to look at that. I don't think that this amendment is good for the state. It's way too much to put in our Constitution. If you think that marijuana should be decriminalized under state law, the amendment should say something to the effect of the recreational use of marijuana in the state of Missouri is not unconstitutional and may be regulated by general statute.
Did legislators in Jefferson City sort of punt? Did they just say, hands off, we're going to put this in the Constitution? Why not get into the debate of it all?
My understanding is that the legislature was working on it, and there are at least serious allegations that the people behind this amendment wrote this amendment as a way to enrich themselves, and they put a lot of money to stopping any sort of statutory reform.
You find those allegations credible?
They're credible, doesn't mean they're true.
Okay, let's move on. You've also subscribed to, signed on in support of this newer theory. Close political observers will understand the phrase or may recognize the phrase, the independent legislature theory. But I want you to clarify that for a moment. It sounds like you think courts should play little to no role in overseeing how aggressive legislators get in drawing or gerrymandering districts?
No, unfortunately, a lot of people that aren't lawyers have made claims about what I said that's totally inaccurate.
Okay.
What I have said was that both Moore and Harper are wrong. Moore says that the Elections Clause of the Constitution gives redistricting authority to the legislature.
Alone.
Alone. The other side has said, no, the Elections Clause gives redistricting authority to the state as a whole, and that would allow the courts to have judicial review. What I'm saying is time, place, and manner, that's what the Election Clause gives control over. None of those have redistricting. When you vote has nothing to do with redistricting. Where your polling place is chosen, whether it's the church, the elementary school, or whatnot, is not in the Constitution for redistricting. And the manner, whether you're voting with a voice vote, raising your hand, secret ballot, the Constitution does not ascribe who has control over redistricting. Therefore, the 10th Amendment controls, which says it's the people that have control over redistricting.
Or the legislature
No, it's the people, and they ascribe who will do it through the Constitution. So in Arizona, where the Constitution says we're going to have a citizens commission that does it, that's been by the people. That's what the 10th Amendment should say. In Missouri, we say that the legislature should do it, but we say that they have to be compact and contiguous, so the state courts should be able to make sure that those requirements that the people put in the Constitution are followed.
So it sounds like you're saying the way it is now is fine. Why sign on to this theory then?
I didn't sign on to the theory.
You didn't file an amicus brief in support?
I filed an amicus brief in support of neither party, because what I said was both parties are using the elections clause, and it doesn't say what either of them says it says.
Okay. Is that kind of like casting a present vote in the legislature?
No, because a present vote doesn't really do anything. My concern is if either Moore or Harper win and the Supreme Court affirms and says, yes, the elections clause covers redistricting, then the federal government has total control over redistricting, and Congress can redraw their own congressional districts, and I think that's a really bad idea.
Well, certainly they would not be a disinterested party, as the courts are supposed to be, and certainly state legislatures have proven they're not exactly disinterested parties in drawing and picking their own voters as well. I want to just put a pin in this and move on. On the independent legislature theory, do you think that courts do have oversight in not only how lawmakers may pick their voters, but in how they certify the results, the delivery of certification from the state legislature to Congress? Some have argued the independent legislature theory means courts can't oversee any of that. Do you see any connection there? How would you?
Well, in this case, I believe that the Constitution of Missouri has given the courts oversight in part over that process, so the court does have that oversight.
All right, secretaries of state don't only oversee elections, they also oversee libraries, public libraries across the state. You've called for new rules to restrict what kind of books can be put on shelves in state-funded libraries, or they could risk being defunded. What's an example of content you'd like to see removed or censored at libraries?
What I have said is that if a library is going to take state taxpayer funds, they cannot use those funds to buy materials that appeal to the prurient interest of minors. There is no prohibition against them using other funds to do that, but they're not allowed to use the state funds.
Who decides what that definition
The second
entails?
part of really what I've done in that rule is I've said that you need to certify that you have policies, a written, publicly accessible policy that shows how you give age designations to material, and then you have to have a policy that is written and publicly accessible for how individuals can challenge those age designations. So what I've said is if you're a library, you can't use the state money we give you for those materials. Then you have to have a policy that your local library will create, so it will vary based on the libraries, of how you decide what's age appropriate for certain ages or not, and then you have to display and release material according to that policy.
This might sound new. A lot of it is actually regurgitated debate on the principle, because in the 1980s our country did go through sort of a moral panic. There was a lot of different censoring, labeling of what movies, TV shows kids could and should consume. We came out with labels. Libraries have had that long ago. You're familiar with the Dewey Decimal System, and as you know...
Well, they don't use Dewey Decimal anymore.
Right, but you understand
the
principle in theory. There's also the idea that parents have a role here, and as you know, local library boards already decide what controversial books they may or may not put on their shelves.
Right.
If it's from, Mein Kampf is a ridiculous example, right? But do they put that on the shelves? So why do you trust library boards, local governments, and parents to do their job?
Well, first of all, this rule empowers parents to do that. It gives them visibility and transparency into what the guidelines are.
Doesn't it threaten to take over local control?
Not at all, because the local library writes the policies.
But you take away their funding if they don't do what you want.
I didn't write their policy. I'm giving them the ability to write their policy. I'm just requiring that it be transparent and that the person that writes it be accountable to the local taxpayers.
Aren't local library board members already accountable to the local voters?
I'm not really sure they are. Let me give you an example. I was at a meeting of public library directors in Columbia, and they were talking about the concerns they have with people challenging books and whatnot. And they asked me, and I said, well, what you really need to make sure you do is that you're representing your district, because each library has a slightly different group of people that, that the social norms are different depending on where you are in the state. You're paid for by those taxpayers. You need to make sure you're representing the wishes and desires of people that pay for it. And I had librarians that said no. What we put in the library is entirely up to us. We put whatever we want, and we need to put something that applies to everybody. And I said, now wait a minute. And I thought I would use absurdity to prove a point, and well, you'll understand that I was evidently wrong. I said, you don't have someone in your library, something in your library that represents everyone in your community, because you don't have a book on how to be a child molester. Of course they don't, right? I thought I was being absurd. Do you know what the response was?
I think I read your quote that you said.
The response was, because they won't publish them.
Right, and if they did, the library board still has discretion not to put it out
No,
there.
the librarian was saying they don't have them because they don't publish them. If they did publish them, they would have them. And what I'm saying is, I don't believe the people of the state of Missouri want their taxpayer dollars to go for things like that. And if librarians want to have things like that in their library, that needs to be according to their policy, and the people that they represent have to know that and be able to dispute it.
It's an interesting moment in our political discourse right now, because there has been, as you're aware and as you're alluding to, increased focus on the content in books, the content that kids read. Of course, you would agree, there is a vast world of information available at their fingertips on the internet.
Potentially, yes.
Whereas a book, you check it out, parents hopefully know what the kids are reading. Do you think that banning books or restricting books is an effective method, or does it make the kids want to read it more?
First of all, I didn't ban any books.
I'm asking generally about the
well,
topic.
let's just be careful to make sure that no one listening to this thinks I've banned books. This policy doesn't ban any books from being in the library.
It threatens state funding if they don't go along.
It does not require them to ban any books to get state funding.
It applies the pressure of the state to local government.
What book does it require them not to have in their library or risk state funding?
I've asked you that question to define an
and
example
I'm telling
of
you,
content.
there is not one.
Right.
Well, I just told you there isn't, and you said, well, no, it puts funding. Look, what this might require is that they're not using taxpayer dollars to buy this book that solely applies to the pure interest of a minor.
Sure.
But they can use other money they have.
I think it's a vague description. There are libraries that want to see a more clear description of what that is.
But the libraries get to write the, they get to write the policy.
Mm-hmm.
Are they saying they want me to write their policy? I don't think one statewide policy is the right way to go about it. I'm letting the local library write the policy.
You're starting an interesting debate across the state. We can move on. I see your point about what
there are no
policy you'd
books
like.
that are banned.
Mm-hmm.
What it might require is a book that they admit is not age appropriate for 5-year-olds. They have to make sure isn't in the 5-year-old section.
Very interesting. Good discussion. I want to get one last topic in
Sure.
before we let you go, or we want to move on to our next guest as well. But you've also recently, Missouri has changed its election law. This is one of the things that maybe people don't know, or it's not widely known yet, is come 2024, when it's time to pick a president, Missouri voters won't be voting in a presidential primary.
Right. As of now. There is some thought that might change. For about almost the last 6 presidential primaries, we have had both a presidential preference primary and a caucus. Mm-hmm. And I call it a presidential preference primary because it didn't matter. Because the party said your presidential primary is too early in the year, therefore you have to have a caucus to actually pick the delegates.
You oversee elections, you're close to these issues. Let me ask you the question this way. Do you trust Missouri voters to pick a president or a presidential candidate that would represent their party?
I pick the people, Missouri voters, in any election.
I don't understand your answer. Do you want primary voters to pick a presidential nominee in Missouri?
What I want is either to have a caucus where the people of Missouri pick or a primary where they pick. I don't want to have a primary election where we pretend that they get to pick it, but it actually gets done in the caucus, and that's what's been happening for years.
So you could be supportive of voters voting in a primary that matters?
Sure, but I want their vote to actually pick the delegates, not them to pretend they are, and then party insiders pick the delegates.
Secretary Ashcroft, a pleasure to have you with us. We hope
Thanks
to have
for
you
having
back.
me.
Before we let you go, would you like to address at all, react at all to the tragedy we saw in St. Louis, the school shooting this week?
You know, I just want to say thank you to the teacher that lost her life, because she was willing to put her life in the way instead of her students. And I grieve with the other set of parents that lost the young daughter. I think it's really unfortunate. We don't know all the facts, but right now one of the things I want to do is praise that teacher.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.